Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now the other day I made a video talking about some great used GPUs to be found on the second-hand market, two of which were the 3GB GTX 1060 and AMD's RX 570 4GB edition card. Today I wanted to do a modern comparison of those two to see how they perform in 2018 with some modern games and some slightly older games that are of course completely up to date and have seen many driver releases and updates themselves since first launching. So let's get on with it and talk about our first game. The first title today is the new Assassin's Creed game, Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and as you can see here it runs pretty much identically in terms of average frame rate on both cards, though we did see slightly more stutter on the 1060, with the game grinding to a halt on one or more occasions, which is represented by that 0.1% low. Now I can say that this didn't happen too often, but as we were exploring this area here, getting into a few fights, we did see that frame rate drop quite a little bit, whereas with the RX 570, although we did experience a 1% low of 27 and a 0.1% low of 20, the game did stay a lot smoother overall. This game though, well, it is quite poorly optimised. Now in Forza Horizon 4 it was the RX 570 that pulled ahead here once again, although it was a pretty even experience on both in terms of the 1% and 0.1% low frame rates. Now excuse the rather crude frame rate counter display throughout today's videos. What I did here is duplicate the layer in Premiere Pro and sort of overlay the fraps counter to put it more central to the screen and enlarge it so that you could get a better idea of frame rate. I find it the best thing to do when comparing gameplay side by side. But let's move on to our next title. Now what you're going to see throughout today's videos most of the time are pretty similar results. There will be a couple of instances whereby one card does pull quite significantly ahead of the other, but here in PUBG it was another very similar experience. Both the 1060 and 570 with the high settings averaged around 50 to 60 frames per second, the 1060 averaged 59 and the 570 averaged 54, so all in all it was a pretty playable experience with 1% and 0.1% lows that once again didn't really differentiate all that much. I'd have to say that both cards offer a pretty decent experience, and I might even recommend turning things down a little bit more to say medium, but you should get away with playing on high just fine with either of these cards, especially if you're using the same pairing as I am, which is a Ryzen 5 and 8 gigs of RAM. Now it's a slightly older title now in the form of The Witcher 3, but it is a game that's seen quite a few patches and updates ever since its release date a few years ago, and it can still put some hardware through its paces. Here I did about half an hour of exploring using each card to gauge a better representation of an average frame rate, and the average for both the 1060 and 570 was taken during the entire half an hour gameplay period. So as I've wandered into slightly busier and dense areas, the frame rate did drop a little bit, but it was still a pretty decent experience when combining both high and ultra settings here. Now when it came to Rainbow Six Siege, it was the RX 570 that pulled ahead by quite some margin, averaging just over 100 frames per second in comparison to the GTX 1060's 87. Now whilst both experiences proved to be pretty smooth and pretty decent ones, the 570 will give you the better all-round gameplay experience here, but as I said, that isn't to say the 1060 doesn't do a fantastic job of running things at high or ultra settings. It really has been a mixed bag so far in this video, but this is one of those instances I was talking about where one card will pull ahead. Now in what is a complete reversal of the previous situation, when it came to Fortnite, the 1060 pulled ahead with just over 100 frames per second. The RX 570 though still put up a fantastic effort, averaging 90. The map in this game is fairly big and the frame rate will differ significantly depending on where you are. So it was quite hard to do the same things on both occasions, especially considering there's no in-game benchmark test, which I would have probably run as well and then combined that average with the average gameplay figures. Fortnite though will run slightly better on a 3GB 1060 than it will with an RX 570, put it that way, when using a combination of both high and epic settings. For the final game, I decided to try Call of Duty World War II. Now, it's an unpopular opinion, but this is one of my favourite in the series, probably since Modern Warfare 2. Here, I tried something a little bit different. I set the frame cap to 60 FPS and see how well both cards could maintain this, although the benchmarks you see on screen will be from the gameplay without the frame cap on. I just wanted to show you that both cards can maintain a pretty solid 60 FPS even with the high or extra settings, though in both instances there will be a few frame drops, particularly on the 1060 3GB. All in all though, it's an okay experience with Call of Duty World War II and both of these mainstream gaming graphics cards. And that's important to remember because both of these retail for very similar prices on both the UK, US and European markets as well. If you use a site like Bidvoy to compare used prices, you'll often find that they all end at very similar auction and buy it now figures too. So whether you're Team Green or Team Red, you want the 1060 or the 570, either one will do, even today, for a pretty decent 1080p gaming experience in which you should achieve pretty close to 60 frames per second, even with the settings turned up. So I hope you've enjoyed this little revisit of the 3GB 1060 in comparison to the 4GB 570 from AMD. I hope you found the content interesting today. If you did like this video, please leave a like on it. Leave a dislike if you didn't. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And hopefully, I'll see all of you in the next video.